Welcome to episode 30 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. Today we sit down in studio, face to face with Angus Bradley, friend, colleague and strength coach, and we're going to talk about everything training related. We're going to look at some concepts and ideas that are kind of new to us, mistakes we've made in the past, regressions of exercises so you can move in a safe and effective manner, and maybe challenge and add to some of the ideas you have around training, and hopefully give you some new ways of thinking about training that can only add to your repertoire to help you move safely, live well, and all that good stuff. Okay, so let's get into the episode. Okay, welcome to episode 30 of the Sean McGuinness podcast. Today we have a good friend and colleague, Angus Bradley, on the show. Our first in-house guest for a while, actually. So, Angus, give us a bit of a rundown. Who you are, what you're about.
I don't even know what to say in these things. I got my Cert 3 and 4. I studied online. I'm basically, when people talk about the problem with the fitness industry and how anyone can get into it, that's my issue.
Yeah.
But I guess, like, my background, I'm a little bit different to the average person who studied their Cert 3 and 4 online. I went to uni originally for journalism and then kind of got to the last year of my degree, and then I realised that you can just be a journalist. So I took some time away from education, tried to be a rock star for a bit. And then at a certain point that didn't work out, and I was like, all right, what have I got? What are the skills that I have that I could turn into a job? And the whole time, even though I was partying too much when I was playing music, I always kept a finger on my fitness. I was always showing up after a big weekend to put in the weights and things like that. So that was sort of the only thing left.
Yeah, one of the reasons we can kind of separate a lot of people in the fitness industry are people that might have it as a hobby or because they like training themselves or whatever. But Angus, like, obviously sees it as a career now. As crazy as that sounds, that is actually a thing on the small percentage.
I remember you said something to me. It was my first year at George Street, and I was really focused on my trainer. And you were like, "Are you an athlete or a coach?" And it definitely stuck with me. And I don't think I flicked the switch for another 2 years beyond that point, but it was definitely something that lingered. Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of people talk about whether obviously Angus is a good weightlifter in the past, very strong. If someone has a passion like that, whether they're gymnast, CrossFit, or powerlifter, and then they automatically see their clients and want to put that method of training onto them, which is what we all do. But give us a bit of a rundown of what you see people do that. We may have all done it in the past ourselves.
Yeah. For me, it's been a weird transition because I did a lot of that stuff before I met you. At that point, I wasn't as into weightlifting, but I was very strength training focused. And I was like, I'd get a client in off the street. I'd be like, all right, first exercise, I'm going to throw a barbell on your back, or we're going to learn to deadlift off the ground, or we're going to, all those exercises, the fitness culture. And that's the thing. I think they are important to get someone into the fitness culture, but it took me a long time to realize that for a lot of people, fitness is a means to an end. Whereas, like, I was literally spending 2 hours in the gym squatting for fun, which is a terrible thing if you're going to try to become a fat loss coach. Because I had to admit to myself at a certain point that, like, I've never had to restrict myself with food. And I thought that meant I could do it. Because you just flick a switch. You know you haven't done it, but you can tell someone else to do it. But I genuinely, the words can't come out of my mouth. When my client has gone off the rails on their diet, I go to say, hey, I need you to do better, but I can't because I've never lived that life and I never have owned it. So now what I do with Gen Pop is I try to get them to buy into physical culture so I can throw a barbell on their back, but so that they think it's worth it.
Yeah, and it's hard coming. Obviously, when you qualify, you literally know nothing. So you go on that tools? Journey. Yeah, you don't have anything, so you go on that journey. But what separates the good coach is the one that obviously want to upskill and learn. And obviously now...
To be fair, it was probably the environment that I was lucky to walk into at George Street.
Yeah. It's good. Well, everyone...
If you think about...
What others?
You just walk into a random gym in the city. Yeah. It's like, think about who came out of there, like James Smith, Graham Morris, you. It's just like Hattie Boydell.
My first gym, I was blessed Jono Bailey worked there. And he kind of just was like... I was still making people stand on Bozy balls, and he was like, look at this type of training. And I was like, if he wasn't there, God knows where I'd be now. And I try to do the same for other people as well.
It's funny in the fitness industry as well because, what's the term? There's a lot of like anti-common sense in the fitness industry that if someone had never told you when you went into it, you would have assumed a bit more correct just going off common sense. Like there's a lot of counterintuitive stuff that people try to tell you in fitness that actually ends up being wrong. And it's not counterintuitive. It's a sort of a common sense thing.
Yeah. And now we've obviously made mistakes over the years training people, but that's obviously how you learn. But once you want to get better, because there is a lot of people, we will say, quote unquote, Gen Pop, that listen to this podcast, they just want to be healthier, train in a way they're not going to injure themselves. Give us a little bit rundown of some of the stuff you have been learning about recently, and maybe some of the training methods you would have coached people differently compared to the past.
Right. I guess the best way to sum this up is, I think as a fitness industry, we agree that people don't move enough. So we come in, we bring people in, we're like, we've got to get you moving. But then, as much as we're telling them the importance of movement, with the other hand, what we give them is a bunch of fear around certain movements. Human beings have thrived in a variable environment since the dawn of time. Like, the earth adapts and changes over time. Humans are apex. I don't know if we're apex predators. People don't like that term, but we're top of the food chain because we've survived and adapted to our environment. So I just think by scaring people off certain movements, you reduce total movement variability. Things start to get stiff. If you haven't used a muscle for a while, it starts to feel terrible. If you're scared of certain movements, you're going to stop using certain muscles. Things start to feel bad. So, there's this idea that people think that they're non-sedentary because they squat, bench, and dead a few times a week, and they're just a complete slob outside the gym. That's not a healthy human being in my eyes. So I guess the main thing, like when I think of total health, I think about like a really rich, variable environment, and people just don't get enough of that. Like, even just in terms of like, if you don't have any sort of locomotive patterns in your training, because obviously our proprioception forms and our eyesight and our senses form a big part of our awareness. So if you're doing someone's a stationary desk job all day, and then they do stationary squats, stationary deadlifts, stationary bench, versus if you get that person doing walking lunges, all of a sudden they're looking around, they're seeing things, they're using their eyes better. They're just going to have, like I said, such a more rich sensory motor experience, which I don't think was as important back in the day, but just people are just living more and more monotonous sort of lifestyles.
So how would you look at, obviously we talked about, you mentioned different stuff like walking lunges. What other exercises, we'll say, and with blanket term, would you include in someone's program that maybe you haven't looked at before? Right.
So I think the classic is when people come in off the gym, two of the most common things people get told is they have rounded shoulders and that they have flat feet or pronated feet. And I think like there's some good, you've heard of the 2-to-1 pull push ratio. Would your listeners be familiar with that?
No, probably not.
So the idea is, people got these rounded forward sitting shoulders. So if you do lots of horizontal rowing movements, that's going to even that out. But I think what you find is people are already stiff at the back of the rib cage. So it sounds good on paper, right? Like the idea of balance. But the main movement of our shoulder blades isn't forwards and backwards. Because I think that's that idea. Shoulders are too forward, got to send them backwards. And we spend most of our time in the gym either pushing things forward or pulling things backwards. But if you think about like, why did our shoulder girdle develop the way it did? Like we've come from chimps, depending on what religion you subscribe to. Yeah. So we would have been climbing, right? So it's just all upward, downward rotation. So that's definitely important. And then if you think about like, what would the next big evolutionary step be? And obviously we know we're persistence hunters. God, I'm coming across as such a functional guru.
So you say upward and downward rotation, are you talking?
So that is, reaching up. Yeah. And then reaching down. And obviously for every 2 degrees that humerus moves upwards, you did Nigel's shoulder course, we want 1 degree of upward rotation of the scapula. And honestly, I think those are the things that people lack a lot more than... Because have you ever had someone fail a seated cable row? They can do it. So like, what's the point of training it? Yeah. It's not going to sit back just because they can already get there. If you can get someone upwardly and downwardly rotate, all of a sudden you're going to train the shoulder blades through a much more realistic, broad range of motion. Because my belief is that the sagittal plane movements actually ride along with the transverse plane. So if you focus primarily on the transverse plane movements, the flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, the frontal plane sagittal movements ride along with that.
So we're saying that someone needs to do more lat pull down with a full range of motion.
So let's go back to square one. So someone comes in, they have rounded shoulders. A lot of the time, the shoulders just round because they're sort of stuck in this position where they're trying to get air into their back. So they're trying to get something forward to create space at the back for posterior expansion of the rib cage. Because that's the thing, when you inhale, a lot of people, because they're all stiff and sedentary, it all just goes path of least resistance. You have no bone here on your tummy, so people just expand through there. And I think people get called chest breathers when they're actually not. Like, people who get called chest breathers, usually they just sort of shrug when they inhale. But if you can actually get someone's chest wall and that posterior bit of the ribcage expanding, people start to feel really nice. And all of a sudden you'll notice that their posture starts to get a little bit better. Because like that whole idea of like just forwards and backwards, pushing and pulling, it's just like viewing the human body as a piece of paper. Whereas if you look at the structure, and like I think that's the big thing, everyone's always looking for clues and like research on biomechanics and stuff like that. But if you just look at the structure, the clues are there. Like what the human, okay, so you got your brain up here. What are our other big organs? Like what are they structured like? Well, you've got your heart, which is just this giant pump. And then, you know, you've got your lungs, which are just like this giant pump. So if you get those pumps going, usually like a lot of things just take care of themselves.
So how would you explain that to someone at home?
What is actually applicable advice? Yeah, right. So honestly, I think when it comes to feeling good and human movement, you've just got to think about like you walking more, honestly, and just like move your body, provide a variable environment. I think people, they took the structured thing of a program and they took that a little bit too far. Like every Monday is bench day because we have to expose ourselves to a consistent stimulus. And it's like, well, your pecs don't know what exercise you're doing. It's like, go do bench press 1 week and then go do push-ups another week, because that's enough of a stimulus so that the muscle understands. It's like, oh, I need to get good at expanding and compressing. He seems to do this every week. I'm going to lay down some bigger pecs. General pop doesn't care how good they are at bench press. Well, some do. And if you want to focus on it, then you can. But yeah, I think just the idea of trying to do as many exercises as you can, I think people got too scared off that. Like, we don't want it random and we don't want it too structured. So we have to, because we know we need the consistency to create the stimulus, but we need the variability because we're human. So just really, truly finding that balance in the center.
So maybe if we're doing, for example, some kind of bench press or dumbbell chest press one day, and then you might come in, that was Monday, you might come in Wednesday, do a push-up.
Yeah.
And then Friday, do another kind of push movement.
And getting that true variety, because you just touched on something that's quite important to acknowledge. People do a push exercise and then they do a pull exercise. So that sounds like they're doing different things. But there's a lot of different language in this world that people talk about movement strategies. So if you think about what's the strategy at the shoulder blade when you do a bench press, down and back, got to create that shoulder stability. What's the strategy at the scap when you do a seated cable row? It's down and back. So are we doing a different exercise, or are we pretty much just doing the same thing in a different direction? Whereas what you can do, what is truly different in my opinion, is if you do, like we said, you got your horizontal rowing movement and then you do a push-up. So we have freedom of the scaps. It's not just all down and back. It's not just constantly compressing the back of that rib cage that's already, not getting any air in there. Because the shoulder blades are a big influence on where we can get air into. Yeah,
because one thing I think they used to teach you before, same if you're doing a chest press, you lock your shoulders back, and then the same with a seated row. And then only when I started to teach people to obviously get a full range of motion, quotation marks, stretch out.
Yeah.
On a seated row or whatever, let your shoulder blades go forward.
Because then you can just bring them back more. Like, everyone's obsessed with down and back, but you don't actually get the movement of down and back when you're already down and back. The easiest way to explain it, and this whole idea of movement variability, because people think that they're not mobile. Most people don't actually have any really big passive mobility restrictions, but just when you teach them to control this, completely out of... What was the question again?
So I said a lot of the time...
What are things
we obviously said shoulders, set your shoulders back and down, and a lot of people will keep the shoulder blades in that position.
Oh, that's right. So what I was getting to is it's about the actual movement. Whereas if you're down and back all the time, you're not actually getting your shoulders down and back. Yeah. You are down and back. So it's just about action versus state.
But even when you look at that, it's like, I'm not a physio, but a lot of the time when you get someone to move again through a full range of motion safely on exercises, naturally everything just works
They
a bit
feel
better.
awesome. Yeah. And some people, like, they get afraid of certain movements because they had a bad experience with it. But it's just about finding the right starting point again. Like, you need to be, so you can be a bit more amygdala driven. Humans are, like, our prefrontal cortex helps us with our movement strategies, which is why humans are so creative with our movement strategies. But it's also why when we get injured, like, that's all our memory, and then we attach that memory to the injury, and then it's your body just trying to protect yourself. But it's a bit unnecessary these days because we have physios, whereas we didn't have physio back when we were cavemen. So, like, you know, we weren't ready for abundant food, and we weren't ready for physical therapy, it turns out.
And what you touched on before, when it comes to posture, people think you need to be kind of chest up, shoulders back the whole time. And then when we bring that into the gym again, that's kind of, as Angus said, it's only half the movement or a quarter of the movement of your shoulders. And if you're not exploring those other movements of letting your shoulders go forward and back and up and down, that's when you create a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, natural resting position of the scapula is in like 5 degrees of upward rotation anyway, so it's not even
touching
actually
together.
Neutral. Yeah. And something somewhat recently that I've come to accept as well is neutral is a great concept. You don't need to be neutral all the time. That's not where the fun happens. Like, neutral as in, I guess, so every muscle in its medium length tension relationship. I just need you to be able to demonstrate neutral. Can you be neutral? Cool. Then we've checked that off. Then you're good. However, if you think your posture looks ugly, I'll help you try to change it. And there's some things that I just have an aversion to, like I have a big anterior pelvic tilt. So when I see that in people, I have to check myself because it can cause a lot of lower back dramas.
And that means?
So a pelvis that is dumped forward. We call it the Kardashian ass. Even though, look, credit to Kim, she does have a nice set of glutes. I actually don't think she has that big of an anterior pelvic tilt, but you know, when she's put one on for the gram.
Yeah, duck ass. I'll probably have it yourself. And you see people on Instagram naturally just give themselves anterior pelvic tilt to make themselves.
Look, some people, if I do a squat in a big anterior tilt, my back's going to be jacked up all week. Some people, they do it, and that's how they heal their back. Like, so it all comes down to, like, you're familiar with the biopsychosocial model. So biopsychosocial model just means it's really hard to associate particular movements with particular injuries and things like that, like, as much as we want to. And there is a bit of common sense to this. Like, if you are a really ugly looking deadlift and your back's just really randomly flexing, obviously that's going to cause an injury, but not 100% of the time. So I think we get too caught up in telling people that they're fucked up. I will let someone tell me that they're fucked up, and then I'll try to help them with what they think the problem is. Because someone's walking around with an anterior pelvic tilt, and it's not limiting them in their life in any way that I can see it, and they don't know about it. They're not even going to know what an anterior pelvic tilt is, because there's so much over-pathologization. I don't even know if that's a word. But people just turn everything into an illness. And I even get worried as well, because because I talk about how to get yourself out of an anterior tilt a lot of the times on my social media, but I don't want anyone to think, oh, that's me, I need to fix this. It's like, if you see it as a problem, if it's causing you dramas, then you need to fix it. But until that point...
Would you say that, okay, we don't want to worry someone, but we might go, okay, there may be, if you're stuck in that posture all the time, it may be...
Because now we don't have movement. Now we're sedentary. We're stuck somewhere. Yeah, it's that steering wheel analogy. Like, everyone has a steering wheel, and I guess that works with the shoulder blades as well. Like, people just have that steering wheel turned all the way into retraction, and they're stuck anywhere with no movement options. You need to try to keep the steering wheel in the middle, as close to the middle as possible. It's nice. Because that's the thing, we can't even stay neutral. Like, do you know how hard it is to stand up? Yeah. And, like, the body just wants to sort of orbit around neutral.
Yeah, so once... I've heard people talk about posture where it's like, okay, there may be not a bad posture within terms, but it's, if, like you said, if you're stuck in the one kind of posture all the time, and then obviously if you have a big Kim Kardashian curved back, like a posterior tilt, and then you train and that kind of makes that worse, that jams your lower back up even more, then there could be an issue.
People, and it's like what people do with diet all the time, right? They go from eating absolute trash to trying to eat vegan or something like that. People do the same thing. Like, before you even think about setting foot in a gym, just get your 10,000 steps per day. Every single movement of the human body occurs not in a big range of motion. Everyone's too obsessed with range of motion as well.
Yeah,
You don't need to move. Like walking is amazing for the body. It happens in a very small range of motion. The other brilliant thing about walking is you perform every single joint action when you walk. So it's the perfect prep to go do some more intense movement. And I think that's a thing as well, because going back to that variability thing with people not mixing up their workouts, it also leads to people, because they don't do enough different exercises, they get really good at certain exercises, which sounds good, but then you need to use a lot of weight to get a stimulus. So
yeah, for example,
it's a weird thing. It's like we look at getting strong as good, but it's like everything's a trade-off. Like, what are the costs of getting someone off the street gen pop? What are the costs of turning them into a good bench presser? And like I said, I'm not anti-bench press. You know, I'm a pig when it comes to lifting weights. I love smashing heavy weights, but you just got to know what you're getting people into. Because I think we turn a lot of people who just want to lose their tummy into pseudo powerlifters, into pseudo bodybuilders, and they get a lot of the baggage that comes along with that.
Yeah, and then like we were saying, I definitely made the mistake in the past where people are talking about, okay, good exercises, and we look at barbell squats and deadlifts and bench press. And if you're just getting people really good in that, and if you look at the extreme end of that, powerlifters, their body has to adapt only to be good at those movements, which then may not be good for actual life. And that may increase their injury risk.
Oh, massively. Because how much... Okay, so everyone gets told they need to do structural balance. You need to be symmetrical. Why? Because you're trying to lift a really heavy symmetrical object. Until... like the gym is the classic example of selling you a problem and a solution simultaneously, or most of the trainers that are in it. And like I said, I'm fine with it because I do enjoy the physical culture aspect of it, and like I wrestle with it mentally because I don't want the fitness industry to become too clinical and too sterile. So like, you know you've got a bung shoulder and you go to your local trainer, you know he's just going to give you this government regulated program or anything like that. I kind of enjoy the chaos of it, but yeah. It needs some changes.
So we say, okay, there's certain movements, for example, squat movements where you're bending from your knees, and hip hinge movements where you're bending your hips. And within that, we would want to increase the movement variables within that. Is that right?
No. See, I would be like, what do they want to squat? Yeah. Like they've seen other people, they want to do it. It's more just about facilitating an environment where you adapt the exercise to them versus trying to adapt them to the exercise. Mm-hmm. So doing things like put the bar in a different spot. Where do you think they should be loaded? Not like, I need to get this bar on your back because that's where I can load it up with the most weight. I need to get your knees more forward. Well, it's like, put something under their heels. Mm-hmm. Don't people shame people for having to elevate their heels and things like that? It's like, when have humans ever been required to have that level of ankle mobility? Never, until we decided to barbell
squat. So what
squat.
does putting something on their heels do? What does that do?
It puts them into a state of exhalation, if you want to go the Bill Hartman way. But all that does is it turns the steering wheel, right? So if you need dorsiflexion,
which means?
So that is how far you can get your knees past your toes. Mm-hmm. How much can you bend at the ankle joint? When you put something under their heels, you're plantar-flexing them. So the more plantar-flexed, and that is pointing your toe away from your knee,
the ballerina
more plantar-flexed you are, the more room you have to dorsiflex. So that's that weird thing of like, you didn't increase their mobility, you just took them back in the other direction so you could send them back the other direction. So it's kind of weird, right? Like, why does someone needs more dorsiflexion? So you give them the opposite. So that's why it's like, it is a little bit counterintuitive, but then you see it in real life and it just sort of makes sense. So it
allows them to go lower, allows them to squat with
yeah, because the human body's movement strategies are just centered around not falling over and like falling on your face. So if you put something under their heels, they're going to fall on their face unless they shift their center of mass back. So that's the whole thing. Sticking something under someone's heels, you could say it's either creating a posterior shift in their center of mass, or you could say it's increasing the potential for ankle mobility and dorsiflexion.
So if that squat movement pattern, you're trying to get someone in, would you start with that? Obviously depending on, let's just say a real general pop person comes in.
What's the easiest way to squat?
What do you mean?
So you just
are you just asking them?
Yeah. No, you don't. It's the easiest way to squat, just goblet squat.
Yeah.
Hold something out in front of them. Because what does everyone do? They just fall forward when they squat. You need to get them more upright. Get constraints-based training. Get them to hold something out in front, and then they're going to feel that. So rather than you having to say to them, get your get more upright, they're just going to feel it.
Yeah.
So they're not thinking about what's Sean telling me when I'm trying to squat. They're feeling that. They're like, I don't want to fall on my face, so I'm going to lean back. Yeah.
So that's going to teach them
just
the
create
skill
a
as well.
constraints-led approach. Well, yeah, because once you get someone squatting like that, you're like, this is a squat. No matter where I put the load, this is how you move. So then you take the heel wedge away, you put the bar on their back, and it's going to look different, but it's going to be much closer to that goblet squat because it's much easier to get a perfect-looking goblet squat and then for them to implicitly teach themselves that rather than just going through all this back squat technique, because me and you could do an entire podcast just on the back squat and it still probably wouldn't be enough information to help someone through a back squat versus if someone just got taught how to goblet squat and then we just put them in a room with a barbell and like figure out how you can squat with that person would have much better success because they implicitly understand what does it feel like to squat.
So a little progression series will be starting off with the plate in front, so your arms are straight.
Yep. So you spoon feed it to them. Anterior loaded, chock their heels up as much as you need.
So a kilo plate.
If you have someone who's failing that, you're not putting the load far enough in front and you're not chocking the heels enough. You cannot go wrong. Everyone who has legs can do a goblet squat with their heels elevated. And then the next logical step would be maybe something like a Zercher. Or have you seen the zombie squats where people just stick their arms out in front? You could throw a barbell across there. And then I'm not sure if a lot of people know what a safety bar is, but a safety bar is we have the load on your back. So we're starting to get closer and closer to that back squat, but you're able to have your scaps forward and your elbows forward to sort of balance that out. And then the last step would be actually go into that back squat. But you can see as soon as you try to get someone to put their arms behind their back, it's a little bit of an unnatural position and some people start to feel less good.
Yeah, I need to get a safety bar for the garage. But
dude, if anyone who's listening who works with Gen Pop, trap bar and a safety bar, they should just call it the Gen Pop bar. It's amazing. Yeah,
I've talked about before, a lot of my online clients, again, you're always looking at risk to reward. So I give a lot of goblet squats. It's quote unquote safer for people. It just puts them in a better position. And like you said before, a lot of people who do have a kind of anterior pelvic tilt, their pelvis is tilted, like Kim Kardashian, naturally your lower back muscles are going to be a bit jammed up. You may inherently be quote unquote tight in your shoulders. So if you're going straight into back squats, it's going to look pretty ugly.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You were saying, like, what are some like tips that the Gen Pop or the listeners of the show can actually apply to their training? And you talked about people like who try to squat with an anterior tilt. Like, I believe that those people really just deadlift their squat. Like, when you have an anterior pelvic tilt, your deadlift and your squat usually end up looking very, very similar to the point where you like might as well just do the same exercise. Versus if you can get like a Romanian deadlift versus a goblet squat, they look completely different. So like then you're actually going to have some true movement variability there. So that's something that I think is huge in terms of trying to get variation within the actual program itself. Just make sure each exercise looks as different as possible so that there's minimal redundancy throughout the program.
And obviously then using that same progressive series where you're kind of starting with the simpler version.
Yeah, exactly. But then you can also use that.
So run me through, because obviously, okay, we've gone to a little squat progression.
Yeah.
What would be like a hip hinge progression?
But back to that progression. So that doesn't mean, so once you goblet squat, that doesn't mean you're done with the goblet squat. So here's how we can flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah.
So let's say you have worked through the progression. You can back squat safely now. How can we get some use out of that goblet squat? It's pretty hard to squat to absolute failure. Obviously, the muscle only knows its proximity from failure. So it's even once you understand how to back squat, you can do a good squat workout, but you can't squat to the point where your legs are completely fried.
And you probably don't want
like
it for
that's
safety,
and then,
risk reward
safety
as well.
Versus a goblet squat, heels elevated.
Yeah.
That's I will put someone there. You've got to create a safe environment to thrash yourself. So I'll open up. I'll go for all my really complex exercises because I enjoy getting people into the physical culture. That makes the gym fun because it's a learning experience. But as soon as we've done our skill work, I put them in the little playpen. Lots of heels elevated, lots of anterior load. I'm like, just go to town. It's almost, I wouldn't say, you never want to say it's impossible to hurt yourself because someone will prove you wrong, but they can just go knock out a set till they actually hit the deck. And as long as they don't drop the goblet squat weight on their toe, they'll be completely safe.
Yeah, so complex lifts you can take from that. You don't want to be going to failure. You want to be doing relatively quote-unquote fresh.
Yeah.
And then the simpler stuff, the bit more stupid-proof exercises, you can take to failure. That's obviously where people use machines, etc.
And that's where the machines are so good. Like, we got told that machines aren't functional. Neither's back squatting. So you got a choice of like, okay, so you can do a back squat that's not functional and will almost certainly give you some niggles. You can do a leg press, which also isn't functional, but at least it's safe. Like, come on. There's just so much ego and like bullying in the way that we try to shame people out of using safe exercise, which is the thing that we're there to promote. Like, it's so weird to me that PTs went through that phase of being anti-machine or an anti-cardio.
Yeah, so luckily someone taught me that earlier. Complex at the start, and then...
Dude, I didn't touch machines at Fitness First my first year there. I used to look at people in there, I was like, idiots.
Yeah, complex.
Meanwhile, I was busy intelligently injuring myself.
Yeah, and that's the same way if you're doing legs. Obviously, like I said, okay, start with a back squat. That's the most complex movement. You want to be fresh. You don't want to be doing that fatigued. Then it might be walking lunge, then a goblet squat, leg press, leg extension, and then a prowler. You've gone all the way through that same...
It maps it out for you. It is, once you really understand progressions and regressions, I think it's something that just coaches are told to focus on. If you want to take control of your own training, you can look up all this stuff. Like, it's all out there on the internet, like a good progression model. If you just Google squat progression, you might have to sift through a few, but does it look safe? Does it seem like common sense?
Okay, so that's the squats. Now talk to me about deadlifts, because again, before I would have a romantic idea about I want to get all my clients squatting, and you have kind of rules around training. But now, obviously, as you're a bit more experienced, you just see everything as a tool to be able to...
Yeah, but then you need to do something, right? Like, you need like some sort of system.
So talk to me about kind of deadlifts, or what would you have clients do when it comes to some kind of hip hinge movement?
The hinge is hard, right?
Yeah.
Because... you've worked with people where it's a complete motor moron, and like, you just want to hop in their head and co-pilot it for them. So I've had to regress to the point where my go-to when I have a real issue getting someone hinging, I'm like, all right, pretend you're being arrested, put your hands up behind your head, and I want you to put your bum on the wall behind you. That's what I start with. But as far as like a loaded variation, which again, going straight to a loaded variation can literally be too much for some people, cable pull through.
Okay, yeah.
So your listeners will probably be somewhat familiar with that.
It's a good progression. Because again, mistakes I've made in the past would be just to get people on barbell deadlifts, or maybe they just want to... they're in the gym themselves, they've bought a program, first thing, barbell deadlifts. Okay, well, you haven't kind of earned the right to do those. You haven't got that movement pattern in check first.
Because this is how I balance my training. I look at the hinge as the opposite of a squat. That's our push to our pull. So if what is the purest squat? That would be a pelvis dropping straight down. So then what is our purest hinge? It will be a pelvis traveling straight back in a line. So if you set that cable pull through upright, it is sending that message. The only goal here, I need your pelvis back. And it just sends that message. It's implicit. You don't need to say pelvis back because of the weight they are feeling. I need to get my pelvis back to relieve this tension. And then it's just a matter of increasing complexity over time, which would be going deeper and deeper into hip flexion. Typically, as people go deeper and deeper, as they go deeper into that deadlift, they just start to lose that motor control because it becomes an increasingly familiar position. You start to stretch out a lot of those tissues at the posterior of the hip, and it gets harder to use those tissues and produce force with them effectively as they move away from neutral. But honestly, no one ever really needs to deadlift from the ground. I'm a big believer that is... you have to have really good ego management to spend your whole life deadlifting off the ground and never push it too far. So I just like getting people up to an RDL. For the people where gym is a means to an end, you never need to go beyond the RDL. And then obviously your hamstring curl is your leg press equivalent there. Well, there's lots of like ground, because you also got to think about the knee flexion component of the hamstring. But yeah, there's your squat and your hinge progression.
And again, with deadlifts, working in a commercial gym, we talked about risk to reward before, especially for people training on their own. Like, how bad have we seen people deadlift in a commercial gym where you're like, okay, well, you could have got that same thing in a safer movement?
Yeah. And that's it. It's just going back to the do no harm thing. Like so many times we're just looking for increased complexity to get out of doing the work, but you don't really need to increase movement complexity for people where it is just a means to an end. I guess you need to so you can get like novel stimuli. You have to have enough exercises to rotate through, but yeah, just because people call it a progression doesn't mean you need to get to the end of it. Just because you start sprinting doesn't mean you need to run sub 10 one day. Just find the point where like you're getting enjoyment out of it. But then when the gym gets stale, obviously then you might be looking at, you know, taking another progression down the rung.
Yeah, no, it's good. And again, I'd like to give as much kind of applicable info for people listening. So it's kind of like there are no rules that you have to back squat and barbell deadlift. Probably like thought about before, isn't it?
It's like, the big rule is there are no rules except for just don't do anything incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
Like most things are fine. People try to scare you out of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Don't have to worry about it. Okay, so reduce range of motion, reduce load, sweet. If there's any ever concerns, there you go to, and then any movement becomes fine. Knees caving in, back rounding, it's all fine. I don't want to see, I say back rounding's fine. I don't want to see someone go up to a deadlift bar and just like cat back deadlift it.
Yeah, you're more talking about...
I also can't say that everyone who does that gets injured. Yeah. How much have you've been a regular at the gym we were working at? As if you haven't seen the same guy come in and deadlift like crap every single day. And like, how is this guy fine? Like, my back wiggles a bit on a deadlift. I can't walk for a week. But then some people have just got a different constitution, or it's just that consistent stimulus. You know, if your deadlift is a piece of shit, make sure it's always the same piece of shit. Some people
and that's when we're talking about loading. It's like, okay, goblet squat, the load's in front. So
it is impossible for your ego to get in on a goblet squat because you just can't hold the weight.
Yeah. And the same with even a front squat. Okay, if the load's too much and your form goes, okay, you probably go forward and the bar will go forward. Again, wrist to reward. But back squats, okay, we've seen a lot of people fail squats who are done bad form, quote unquote bad form. You're increasing your risk of injury maybe over time if you keep doing it.
Yeah.
For some people they may be lucky. For someone else,
it's one of those common sense things as well, because like if you do have some awkward form, it's going to be hard to replicate it consistently. So you've got to pick something that you can consistently replicate. Yeah. It sucks as well, because I know you feel my hesitance to say that anything will definitely guarantee you an injury, but that's such a cop-out.
No, it's not. But
you got to find that middle, because I know you get it.
Yeah. When we look at barbell deadlifts, you just don't want a lot of really heavy loaded
and like inconsistent flexion. Like what I say to people, I've had clients who want to deadlift with a rounded back, but I'm like, all right, we'll set up rounded then. But that's not what happens. People, they want to excuse their roundedness, but it is unintentional. They just pretend it's on purpose. So it's like, okay, if you think that it's a good idea to deadlift with a flex spine, set up with it flexed. A lot of people don't. Everyone sets up straight. It's like, well, if you set up straight, you need to keep it straight. Use your spine as a lever. Yeah,
I like to leave that stuff to the professionals who actually know how to.
So I don't do it. I truly believe you can flex your spine hard in a deadlift and it'll be safe. I don't do it because I'm aware of the eyes that are on you in a commercial gym. And you also have to think about what are people going to say to your client. So if you do a session with a client, round back deadlifting, it goes fine. Their back feels amazing. And some trainers like, rounding your back will blow out your back. They're going to feel bad. So you got to exist in this world where other trainers exist, and you need to protect your clients from the big bad world. You can't just be doing all the funky stuff with them and then they get ridiculed as soon as they're outside of your little tribe.
Yeah, a lot of the info I try to give to people is just
you got to fit it in with what's out there.
Yeah, and if I'm trying to give tips, it's different for the people I can see face to face because that's completely different. But from online or people I might give info to the podcast, go, okay, let's try with the least risky movements that will give you the max benefit. So like you said, you don't for some people progression mightn't be lifting more weight, it might just be going lower. Or like if we look at lunges and split squats, people never go down. Or
pick your progression. A lot of people want to add range of motion and add intensity. Just pick one. Or like you can use it as an alternate. It's like, all right, I feel a bit fried today, so I'm going to go for more range of motion so I can get an effective workout without having to load up as much. Or maybe like you're feeling a bit stiff one day, so operate within a shorter range of motion. That's okay. And if it feels good, use a little bit more weight because it will be safer in a smaller range of motion.
Yeah. Talk to us about, we've touched on the shoulder, upper body movements. Talk about stuff you see in a commercial gym that you may have a problem or may want to give tips to the people you see lifting, but you know they're not going to take your advice a lot of the time?
You see a lot of like people who overdo movement prep, I think, particularly like thoracic extension drills and things like that. I think a lot of people already have a really flat thoracic spine. Like,
so it's talking about like middle of your back?
Thoracic spine, it's any part of your rib cage. Sorry, any part of your spine that has a rib attached to it is your thoracic spine. So just have a feel around any bit of your back where your rib cage is. That's your thoracic spine. Whenever you look at that thing in an anatomy textbook, it always has a really nice curve. This is another one of those common sense things. Everyone tells you need an extended thoracic spine. I don't know. In the anatomy textbook, it's flexed. When you have a look at people who move really well, it's flexed. Yeah, think about Conor McGregor. He doesn't have what I would call perfect posture, but he has a lot of boxers and martial artists, not necessarily wrestlers, have that real nice thoracic curve. And that is something that you do not see in gym culture. A lot of people in gym culture have a really flat back. And people don't want a hunched back. You don't want it too hunched because that looks ugly. Why is a flat back bad? Like everyone wants to sit there like they've got a rod up their ass when they're working at their desk. But at the end of the day, that's just going to stiffen you up. So it's like people in the gym need to be more okay with not bad posture, but just let your spine around every now and then. Especially the bits that have the rib cage attached to it. There's so much bony structure there that gets really stiff and it causes a lot of problems. You need a nice round surface for your shoulder blades to glide all over. It's just, you've got to respect I don't want to say the design of it because it's not like God just put it together, but you have to respect what it's adapted into, and it's adapted into a certain shape for a reason.
So what
that is like we discussed, a lot of people do heaps of seated cable row and then they do their bench press with shoulder blades down and back. And then they wonder why they can't get their arms above their head without flaring their rib cage. That's because your body's like, oh, it's bench press time now. Every time we move our arm, shoulders go down and back. That's good, right? And it's not good for an overhead press because you need, like we said, for every 1 degree that humerus, your arm bone comes up above your head, you need that shoulder blade rotating a degree as well. And just so many people don't have that because thoracic spine overextended, all they do is bench press and row, and the scaps just don't have a nice surface to slide over. So that's a counterintuitive thing to me.
So you're making sure people do different angles of pressing, overhead pressing.
Get people moving in every single direction, and then you'll just find that they find the middle, right? Because if you explore the corners, you don't actually know where neutral is. How do you know where neutral is unless you've been through full flexion, full extension? So, because imagine if you hadn't seen half this room, and I was like, "Where's the middle of the room?" You have no idea where it is. Whereas if you've seen the whole room, you're like, it's right here. That's exactly what your body does. It won't sit in perfect neutral all the time, but you'd be close enough. So like the other ones is like people's lunges start to look like their squats. So again, you think you've done 2 different exercises. Really, it just looks like the same thing. Is this going out on... Yeah, people see the visuals. If you're listening, just visualize this. Everyone can Google a picture of a pelvis. And you've got 2 hemipelvi, I guess. Your pelvis is 2 bits. And then you've got your sacrum, which is a wedge down the middle, that little triangle shape. Most of the movements people do in the gym, it's just the pelvis moving as one piece, but you want to set up your single leg work so that the pelvis is using opposite strategies for each side. Because again, people do that really wide stance lunge. So it's all just external rotation and abduction. Basically, your knees just moving away from your midline. You need to be able to move your knees in towards your midline to propel yourself effectively. So I actually prefer an inline lunge. If you love that chest up, knees out style of squatting, not a bad thing. But you can't have this chest up, knees out version of lunging. Lunge with your feet really close together in a line, and then all of a sudden you're getting all those movements that you don't get in your squat, and then you're getting it in your lunge. Because realistically, you could just say, well, why don't I squat narrow? A lot of people can't squat narrow. So it just seems to work a lot better that way. So just, looking for those variability gains, because again, you won't be able to lunge as much weight that way. So I think people think that that's a bad thing, or I'm not suited for this exercise because I'm bad at it. It's like, well, get good at it. So
that's kind of the benefit of single leg work as well. You can
making sure it's true single leg work. Yeah. So getting your pelvis, for the people who are watching, so it's like the walking. Like, that's what you need your pelvis to do. It's not, this is a huge exaggeration because the range of motion of the SI joint is like a couple of millimeters, but you just need a little bit of freedom there so you can alternate, because if the pelvis doesn't move, it has to borrow it from elsewhere. So if the pelvis isn't moving as much, maybe your knees or your ankles need to bend more. And then the ankle's like, why do I have to bend so much? And then they start to get cranky on you and certain parts of your body start to mess up.
Yeah.
Yeah. And because if you think about it as well, it's like, it's a lot of, if you do lots of knees out stuff, it's a lot of external rotation, whereas like you need external and internal rotation to walk around. Like I was saying, you need every single movement. If you're missing any flexion, any extension, any ab or adduction, internal, external rotation, someone with a good eye who understands gait or breathing will be just able to see it in the way you breathe and walk. Yeah.
And obviously, okay, so talk to us then.
Which again, we go back to, what are most gym goers not doing? They're 10,000 steps per day.
Yeah, moving in general.
Yeah, just actual movement, not shit we made up.
Yeah.
Which again, I love all that stuff. I'm not the anti-barbell guy. I am the barbell guy.
Yeah, it all
you got to know what to do so that you can do more of the barbell, because it is so fun.
It all complements each other. You can't just focus on one thing. With the single leg work, we obviously see people, they may be doing Bulgarian split squats or split squats, and they're
Let's talk about the Bulgarian split squat, because that's one that I see.
Yeah. Well, they're jacking up the back.
Right? So we've got these people, we've just discussed how a lot of people have that pelvis that's dumped forward. They've got that Kardashian ass. So what happens when you throw a leg up behind them? They have to go even more into that posture. So it's not that it's bad for everyone, because some people can do a Bulgarian split squat or a rear leg elevated split squat, and they don't go into that horrible, I shouldn't say horrible extended posture, the posture that I don't like.
Well,
so
then
for those people, it's okay.
And they're going to be like, oh, I'm feeling all of my back hip flexor instead of my front. My back muscles are all jammed up.
Versus, I find myself giving a lot of front foot elevated split squats, because again, that's going to encourage them to get their pelvis back under their head or back under their rib cage. But I know at the start of this, you were talking before we hit record of people that have that huge kyphosis and their hips almost sit in front of their head. For someone like that, a Bulgarian split squat is going to be exactly what the doctor ordered, and it's going to make them feel amazing, because all of a sudden their movement's going to clear up because you manage their sagittal plane better. Yeah, because that's the thing. A lot of compensations show up primarily in the sagittal plane.
Yeah.
So if you get someone out of anterior pelvic tilt, you'll often find that their ab and adduction and their internal and external rotation clears up a lot as well.
So, as a blanket statement, for a lot of people, anterior pelvic tilt, that Kim Kardashian, they would be better suited to
front foot elevated split squats and anteriorly. So this is where you can double up on it, right?
Yeah.
So you've got the hips tucked back under because you've elevated their front foot. So what happens when people have an anterior... What's happening at the top? What are the problems there? Because anything that's happening anywhere, there's an equal and opposite reaction somewhere else. People who have anterior pelvic tilt always have flared ribs. Because if you don't flare your ribs when you have anterior pelvic tilt, you'll fall on your face or you'll fall backwards. So what are some things to get some ribs down? Well, if I zercher someone, then that's going to... in the crease of the elbows there, that's then going to bring their ribs down. So now we're hammering that thing. We're really sending a strong message. You're going to fall over if you don't change your posture to something that's a bit more neutral.
Yeah, so if you envision someone trying to walk around nice and tall, chest out, and they already have that Kim Kardashian, their ribs are flared out too much.
Yeah.
They're in a bad
it's
position.
this snowballing effect because, like... So in the gait cycle, gait is just a fancy term for when people are walking around. So hip extension is when we push off the ground and push ourselves forward. The way our body likes to do it, and the way it's adapted to do that, is to do that with internal rotation. So that will be rotating your femur bone, your thigh bone, in towards your midline. But when people don't have that internal rotation because they can't manage their sagittal plane, because they've got that Kardashian ass, the only way to propel yourself, because you can't extend and internally rotate your hip, you just shift your sternum more forward to create more falling forward. So you'll see people, I'll do a demo for you after this, they'll just be walking feet turned out almost 90 degrees to the side, sternum just way in front of them, just trying to get propulsion somehow, because it doesn't matter if you're doing your squats good and your knees aren't caving in, because now your body's like, well, how the hell am I supposed to walk forwards now? Because you're taking that away from me. So your knees don't cave in your squat anymore. You've got a big butt, but now you can't walk.
Yeah, there's always compensations ever, isn't it?
It's just a trade-off with everything. Just accept no matter what you do, there's going to be a cost to it. And that doesn't make it a bad thing.
And what you're ideally trying to give people, because a lot of, unfortunately, what we see with people who may have certain postures and then develop problems with that, there's just a lot of band-aid approaches, isn't it, for, again, the people that may have this anterior pelvic tilt, who that with lower backs jammed up. Oh, no worries, I'm just going to get a Thai massage and just get my back rubbed out. Well, you're not fucking solving it.
You're not changing who you are, because that anterior pelvic tilt, it's a manifestation of who you are.
Yeah.
Your body didn't do it for no reason. It didn't do it to betray you. That's the other thing. People always feel like they're at war with their bodies. Your body is taking care of you. Have faith in your body. Trust your body. Body heals. It's like you know what it's like when you get someone who's lost that trust in their body. It's like then psychologically they're not willing to do the things that are actually going to create healthy habits and things like that. So yeah, I think don't be so angry at yourself when your body gives you an anterior pelvic tilt, because it's just trying to stop you from falling on your face, or it's trying to make sure you can still walk around. So you need to give your body something so it will take away that anterior pelvic tilt. You need to make sure it doesn't feel like it needs it anymore.
Yeah, it's the same when people have quote-unquote tight traps. So they're like, well, your head's just yanked forward so you can maintain eye level. Like, there's always compensations going on.
Yeah. And I've never seen someone who had short traps.
Yeah.
That's that other big one where it's like everyone feels it because everyone hears about tight traps, but tight just sounds, I think we just associate that word mentally with shortened, but like we know, not the case.
Yeah. Okay, and then talk about a little bit about what kind of core work you would put in for a lot of people. Okay, core being obviously such a used up word, but maybe what ab work, or what you talk a lot about breathing and stuff. What would you put in for a general pop person into the program?
Okay, so it depends what we're doing, because I think there's a few different needs. I think you need to teach people to control their sagittal plane, which would be getting out of that anterior pelvic tilt. You can be too flexed, too folded forward, or you can be too opened up.
So the opposite anterior pelvic tilt, someone who's just kyphotic.
The opposite to anterior pelvic
posterior
tilt would be
tilt?
posterior pelvic tilt.
And we'll see those people where their hips are too far forward.
Yeah, I think that's a much rarer presentation these days.
Yeah.
But honestly, it doesn't matter what someone is, if you just throw every movement at them, and that's a ham-fisted approach. Yeah. But honestly, if you're not really across this thing, do everything to everyone. Make sure you load it safe, regress it accordingly, and you'll see the things that work on them. Mm-hmm. So it's like, you need to assess people so that you can come up with a solution that'll work quickly. But if you're not that good at assessing and seeing this stuff and judging someone's posture, just throw as wide an array of different movements at them in a safe manner as possible, and you'll find the groups of moves that start to work for them. And if someone wants
to put who someone might be listening to in their own program, what exercises or what movements do you see a week with people in general with the core?
People just can't keep their belt buckle pulled up towards their rib cage. So I love planks for teaching that, but a lot of people, when they do planks, they feel it a lot in their lower back. Yeah. So I like for people to be able to feel the ground when they're planking. So back yourself up against a wall, have your heels pushing into a wall, and then all of a sudden you'll find it's easier to tuck your pelvis under because you can drive your heels into the wall and use that to sort of leverage a bit more glutes, because glutes and abs, they sort of work together. When they shorten, they pull the body into the same sort of position. Now, I think a lot of people do too much static core training because I think people look at the core purely as stabilizer muscles. Yes, when you're under a heavy back squat, but to feel good, to look around, to walk around, we need to get that rib cage moving. So I do like crunches that have, a lot of people I know get pain from crunches, but it's just a matter of regressing it and taking it slowly. I like the wood chops, and I like a lot more rotation instead of anti-rotation. And I do like, instead of training anti-lateral flexion, which is not bad to train, I'd rather train more lateral flexion, because most people you meet can't rotate and can't laterally flex. So we focus on anti-rotation, anti-lateral flexion. It's like, this person's already stiff.
Yeah.
Like, people who, like, stability and stiffness is the same thing. So it's like, it's not good or bad, it just sort of is.
So you talking about wood chops where they're moving?
Yeah, man, wood chops. Wood chops are good. Even just like a side-laying rotation. Like, I know that's not loaded, but that's just getting them through. That's the ultimate regression, I guess, before you throw them into a wood chop.
Yeah.
But then again, like, you need to teach someone to control their sagittal plane before they rotate. Have you ever seen, you play a bit of golf, don't you?
Yeah.
You definitely don't extend your back to rotate in golf.
No.
You keep your ribs tucked in, don't you? So teach someone how to tuck their ribs correctly, and then, get them rotating, doing side bends and things like that. Doing the side plank where you make it a bit more dynamic, touch your hips down to the ground and lift them back up. All that stuff, I guarantee you get that rib cage moving, you're going to feel amazing.
Farmers carries, I know that's popular.
Farmers carries, suitcase carries, like, because again, then you bring the locomotion into it. I'm big on just throw the kitchen sink at them again when it comes to core training, which I realize is not good advice because I'd rather give you something more specific. But I think that's the issue. The advice around core training is too much centered around do this one exercise. I'm like, do every exercise and you're going to feel awesome.
Yeah,
like, how good do you feel when you start a new program?
If someone's just covering all the bases, like, okay, it's not as specific as me coaching you, but it's going to be better than what everyone else is.
Because as well, everyone's so caught up in like, I need to do the same shit all the time because I need to chase adaptions. But it's like, well, how muscly are you trying to get? Like, at a certain point, it's like, don't worry about progression. Just worry about just moving and constantly finding new challenges. Like, that's how you keep the gym fun and entertaining, and that's how you maintain health. Because if you get too good at anything that is not just breathing and walking, because that's all we are put here to do, you're going to be compensated. But that's not bad, because I like to do things that we weren't designed to do. But you just need to accept that there's going to be a price somewhere.
Yeah. So how has your opinion on gym work and strength training changed then over the last few years to where you are now?
I used to think that everyone needed to lift weights. Now I think that weights is like a medicine that we developed because we live sedentary lives. The solution would be to not need the medicine, just to go out. This sounds dumb as well, because this isn't how I want to live my life, which is why I supplement with the gym. Yeah. But we should just be out walking around, climbing trees, trying to find food all day. But then from that, now obviously, like, the gym is just a way to replace that. So I don't want to be seen swinging off stuff and acting like a lunatic in the gym. So I just go in and I'll do really typical gym structured workouts, but I'll just sort of explore every particular avenue in fitness. I might go in one day, train like a CrossFitter, go in one day, train like a powerlifter, go in one day, train like a bodybuilder. Doing a Zumba class would probably make me feel amazing if I could lose the bloody shame of hopping in one of those rooms. But yeah, you know what I mean? Just trying to create a different experience for yourself. Not every time you go into the gym, but just a bit more than what people currently do. Yeah,
because there's trade-offs. So obviously,
because you get fast progress when you do new stuff all the time. Like, as much as you don't get as crazy adaptions, like, you're always improving at something. I think that scratches an itch for people.
And then obviously the more variety of movements you have within the quote-unquote safe realm,
the more human you become.
And the less chance of you getting injuries in itself. Like,
it makes sense, right? Like, think about any other thing in life. What do you tell people with food? Do you tell people, like, greens are good? Eat greens. You can keep eating greens. Like, you know, like, there'd be something. What's carrots even? Yeah. Carrots are good, right? You eat too much vitamin A, you fucking die. So it's like, you got to eat the rainbow. You got to lift the rainbow. It's all about that variable environment. It always comes back. Variability, I think, is a very undervalued principle that people don't acknowledge. Everyone's worried about volume, intensity, frequency, and yes, those are the things that drive adaptation. But like, it's just meaningless adaptation because it's not actually a reflection of the environment that we live in. So you're adapting to the gym. You're not adapting to life.
Yes. So obviously, if we look at gym on one end of the spectrum, we may have powerlifting, and they're lifting in the one kind of range of motion only within those three exercises for a majority of people. And then bodybuilding, who probably are only smashing machines all day. They're not using those other stabilizing muscles.
Yes.
Maybe on the other hand, then we might have CrossFit where you're like, okay, a lot of variability, but is that like, do we need a combination between that and smart programming?
And it's a lot of fast things. CrossFit, when it's regressed accordingly, is brilliant.
Yep.
There is nothing better, and this might be controversial, there is nothing better for a human, I believe, than really well regressed CrossFit. But then it can manifest in other ways. I think what you do is really good. You lift weights, you do pretty much bodybuilding stuff in the gym, right? Yeah, and then you go do jiu-jitsu, which jiu-jitsu is chaos. Yeah. So you've got so much variability within that. And like, you might blow a knee out doing jiu-jitsu, but like, that's also part of life. And that's why I don't like making people too scared of injuries, because You get injured, you just bounce back.
Yeah.
Like, humans are really good at recovering. It's like we've made injuries out to be like way bigger of a deal. I'm more concerned with chronic pain than like acute injuries or things like that.
Yeah.
Acute injuries are easy to get over. You just take a week off or something like that. It's the chronic pain and things like that that develop from sport and getting good at things and pursuing what we perceive as health.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, so it's like nutrition. It's a happy medium between variability and then programmed in quote unquote safe manner. Nice mix of everything.
But then, unfortunately, if you're trying to be Mr. Olympia, sometimes you got to only eat chicken and broccoli because something else will sort of send you off the rails. Even though it's healthy for a human, it's not healthy for a Mr. Olympia. Yeah. So I guess you got to try to do some soul searching and just work out what is your individual context. Like, what are you trying to get from the gym? Not like what is someone telling you need from the gym, because you know what you need. Don't let someone sell you a problem and a solution.
Yeah, and then in terms of fat loss, we want that. We want a nice variability.
It works good, right? Variability, lots of steps. What are steps good for? They're good for burning calories. Like, the thing just writes itself.
Yeah, then the resistance is just to maintain that muscle or build some muscle.
Yeah.
So that's we've covered everything. And last question, when you've obviously not doing as much weightlifting now, when are you actually going to join us in jiu-jitsu, talking about that?
I promised myself I would land an air reverse on my surfboard before I got knee barred by some idiot. So that's the thing.
White belts, you're not allowed. You're not
allowed to do that.
No.
Do you do a lot of stuff in the gi?
Yeah, they don't really do leg locks unless you're blue belt.
I swear I'm getting close. Once I'm talking, as soon as I land one, I will literally go sign up at jiu-jitsu that day. I would just be so heartbroken if I injured myself and couldn't complete my surfing goals. I need that, especially because I'm trying to be a high performance surf coach now.
I haven't got one injury actually up to now. Not one niggle, one injury, nothing.
Good partners.
Yeah. You have to go to a good gym.
I will get into it eventually.
Okay, and then what have you been doing recently? You obviously touched on the surfing. Bit.
So obviously everyone's pivoting now because they're in the middle of a bloody pandemic and gyms shut down. So we all had some soul searching to do. So my pivot has kind of been, I've got back into surfing, sort of had a look at the space. There's a few surfing coaches that get a little bit crazy with some of their prescriptions. So I thought that was a space where I could have some impact. But honestly, my day-to-day is just working with real people who have a bit more athletic goals. Like I said, I've never been someone who's had to restrict my food. So if you want a trainer who would just, like, to give you an idea of my ideal client, my client came around with a case of beer the other night and said, I just want to max out my deadlift. That's my kind of client. That's who I want to work with. Yeah.
No, you're one of the few that I told Louise, I was like, there's not many trainers in Sydney I'd probably trust to refer you on to train with someone. Angus is one of them, definitely.
I love hearing that. As soon as you know someone would refer a family member or a loved one towards you, like, all right, that means something. Thank you very much.
And how did COVID go for you anyway, ups and downs?
Printing money. I was really lucky. I ran into a few really good clients that I clicked with. I started a mentorship program under a coach that I really respect. I finally stopped running my business entirely out of one bank account. So have you read Barefoot Investor?
Yeah.
Bro.
Yeah.
Game changing. That's like, if your financials are just all over the shop, go read Barefoot Investor if you're Aussie. It's like learning to count your macros for finance. Super basic.
Well, ironically, it's exact same stuff I tell people when it comes to habits. It's like, stop relying on discipline, just systemize everything so you don't have to think about anything.
And the same with exercise. Set yourself up for success. People want to make things hard for themselves.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm lecturing you guys. I do it to myself too, outside of fitness.
That's good. You're going well. You spent the time off, and then we actually just talked earlier with some marketing and stuff like that now, which is what I always tell people. I hate giving any advice to that because most people just need to actually get fucking better as a coach. They don't need to learn that.
Well, I feel like we're at the point now where it's like, now it's time to create the system so that you can increase the impact that you can have and get paid.
And where can everyone find you?
So Angus Bradley 92 Instagram. I also host a podcast with my brother. If you're really into sport and general fitness, it's High Performance Podcast, HYPERFORMANCE podcast.
That podcast is brilliant. How many episodes are you at now?
Dude, we're coming up on 200th episode.
Oh shit!
And we're gonna have to do something. Yeah. So if you like sport, check it out because you say some silly stuff every now and then.
Excellent. All right, go check him out. 100%. Look for coaching, face to face or online. Check him out.
I promise it's not all breathing and walking. I'm not a functional lunatic.
Nah, it's a good mix of everything. All right, that was brilliant. Any questions? Message us, and we will see you all in the next episode. Boom. there we go. Episode 30 done and dusted. Great episode, training related. Really hope you enjoyed that and got some new concepts and ideas to add to your own training. Maybe rethink a few quote unquote rules about training that we all used to think. And give you a little bit more options to your training to be able to move safely, move well, and overall live a good life. If you have any questions, please DM me on Instagram, Facebook, message Sean at livelongperformance.com, and we can go over your questions in the next episode. So there you go. Please give me a rating and review, a good one obviously, on iTunes and Spotify, so more people can listen and hear the gospel to add in a positive manner to their training, nutrition and life in general. Okay, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next episode.